Filed under Murder by Win Valentine. First edition published by i2iHype, LLC 2025. Copyright 2025 by Win Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, scanning, or otherwise without written permission from the publisher. It is illegal to copy this book, post it to a website, or distribute it by any other means without permission. This novel is entirely a work of fiction. The names, characters, and incidents portrayed in it are the work of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or localities is entirely coincidental. Win Valentine asserts the moral right to be identified as the author of this work. Designations used by companies to distinguish their products are often claimed as trademarks. All brand names and product names used in this book and on its cover are trade names, service marks, trademarks, and registered trademarks of their respective owners. The publishers and the book are not associated with any product or vendor mentioned in this book. None of the companies referenced within the book have endorsed the book. Book cover by Dana Sacco. Chapter 1. The Weight of the Written Word. The dim lighting in the rare Reed's room always reminded me of a Victorian séance, atmospheric enough to summon the dead but too dark to properly file anything. I flicked the switch, and the ancient bulbs reluctantly flickered to life, casting theatrical shadows across glass display cases and the rickety oak ladder that had nearly killed me twice since I'd become head librarian. The room had been meticulously organized yesterday. Ellie's work, no doubt. In the 6 months since I'd hired her as our special collections assistant, Eleanor Voss had proven herself almost obsessively thorough. Her white-gloved hands had arranged every volume with geometric precision, like a curator setting up a museum exhibit rather than a library archive. "Home sweet tomb," I muttered to no one. The climate-controlled archive smelled exactly as it always did. Old parchment with notes of lavender cleaning oil and the faintest hint of something I couldn't identify. Perhaps the collective desperation of local historians who'd spent too many hours in here. I settled at the processing table, arranging my tools with practiced precision. Archival gloves, acid-free folders, conservation brushes, and a cup of Earl Grey that had already cooled to the temperature of disappointment. Today's task: cataloging the Hemsworth donation, a dusty box of historical miscellany that some well-meaning family had dumped on us after clearing out their great-aunt's attic. Most of it would be worthless, but protocol demanded I check every item. I lifted the lid, and my nose immediately wrinkled at the unmistakable scent of mildew. Oh, fudge nuggets. Water damage, the archivist's nemesis. Several documents had clearly experienced some form of liquid trauma. Tea, perhaps, or tears, or something I preferred not to contemplate. I carefully separated the salvageable items from the beyond help, silently cursing whoever had stored these papers near a leaky roof. An hour in, my fingers brushed against something unusual between the brittle pages of an 1892 tax ledger, a crisp sheet that felt too smooth, too perfect against the crumbling edges surrounding it. I extracted it carefully, immediately noticing the incongruity. A typewritten note on aged paper that nonetheless didn't match the era of the ledger. The paper was old, yes, but the typing was relatively recent, 1950s at the earliest, judging by the font. My eyebrows climbed toward my hairline as I read, the volume titled Foundations of Ravenswood has been removed for safekeeping. Some truths were never meant to be reopened. The history that burns brightest leaves only ash. The curator. Well, that's not dramatic at all, I said to the empty room, but something in my chest tightened. The note had that particular blend of pomposity and menace that suggested either a prank or something genuinely troubling. In Ravenswood, the line between the two was often tissue-thin. I turned to the computer terminal, a dusty relic that wheezed to life with glacial reluctance, and searched our database for any mention of Foundations of Ravenswood. Nothing in the catalog. I checked acquisition records, donation lists, even the handwritten ledger we kept for items still awaiting processing. Nothing. Which was strange, because Ravenswood's Historical Society documented everything. This town collected records like some people collected garden gnomes, obsessively and without clear purpose. My curiosity sparked. I rose from the desk and moved to the historical section. My fingers trailed along leather spines and cloth bindings, checking for gaps or misfiled items. The History of Ravenswood County, Volumes 1 to 3. The Ravenswood Architectural Survey of 1923. The Founding Families Census. All accounted for. No empty spaces where foundations might belong. Someone was either playing an elaborate joke or had gone to considerable trouble to remove all traces of this book from our records. Neither option seemed particularly reassuring. I returned to the processing desk and sank into the creaking chair. The ornate wooden desk in the corner, supposedly once owned by the library's founder, beckoned with its familiar comfort. I retrieved my journal from my bag and opened to a fresh page, pen hovering for only a moment before the words flowed out in my elegant, slightly Gothic script. Some people drown in emotion, others drown in the truth. But the most poetic end? To be crushed by your own footnotes, buried beneath years of obsession and a story no one else believed. I stared at what I'd written, a chill skittering across my shoulders. Sometimes my own imagination unsettled even me, the way my mind automatically crafted these elaborate death scenarios. I snapped the journal closed and tucked both it and the mysterious note into my messenger bag before any of my colleagues could wander in and question my extracurricular writing habits. Turning back to the donation box, I finished categorizing the remaining items with mechanical efficiency, my mind elsewhere. Amateur treasure hunters? Dramatic town historian with a flair for mystery? Or something else entirely? Ravenswood had too many secrets for comfort, and I'd stumbled across more than my fair share since becoming the librarian. The curator, I murmured, sealing the last folder. Pretentious buttercream frosting. What about buttercream? I nearly jumped out of my skin. Cleo stood framed in the doorway, her pastel yellow cardigan so bright against the muted sepia tones of the archive that it was practically a visual assault. She clutched a novelty mug shaped like a typewriter that read, "My plot thickens," in flamboyant script. Nothing about buttercream, I said, gathering my things. Just muttering about amateur historians making my job more complicated. Ooh, complicated how? Cleo's eyes lit up like a child spotting an ice cream truck. Did you find something interesting? Please tell me it's interesting. The book club ladies are killing me with their romance novel debates. If I have to hear one more 40-minute argument about whether the Duke's emotional constipation was adequately resolved by chapter 27, I might shelve myself in the reference section permanently. Just budget reports, I lied, sliding my bag protectively behind me. Fascinating stuff about... Liar! Cleo interrupted, pointing an accusatory finger tipped with sparkly pink nail polish. You found something weird, I can tell. Your left eyebrow does that twitchy thing when you're holding out on me. My hand flew to my traitorous eyebrow. It does not. It absolutely does. And you're doing your bag-clutching thing. She gestured to where I had, in fact, wrapped my arm around my messenger bag like it contained the nuclear launch codes. Come on, V, spill it. What did you find? Secret love letters? Treasure map? Confession to a century-old murder? I sighed, recognizing the inevitability of Cleo's curiosity. It's probably nothing, just someone's idea of a historical scavenger hunt. I showed her the note, watching her eyes widen comically as she read. Holy strawberry shortcake, she breathed. The curator? That's the most deliciously ominous signature ever. She looked up, already vibrating with excitement. We have to find this book. We don't have to do anything, I corrected, locking the archive door behind us. It's probably just nothing. This is exactly how every good mystery podcast starts. Cleo was already pulling out her phone, creating what appeared to be a color-coded research schedule. I'm thinking we start with the Historical Society records, then cross-reference with town hall archives, Maybe interview some of the older residents. Cleo, it'll be just like the Deadly Bookmark podcast, episode 42, where they found that diary hidden in the false bottom of an antique. We are not a true crime podcast, I said firmly, but already felt my resolve weakening under the tidal wave of Cleo's enthusiasm. She grinned, seeing my capitulation before I'd even admitted it to myself. Not yet we're not, but we have all the key ingredients: mysterious note, missing book, ominous warnings, and, she poked my arm, a sardonic librarian with a secret journal of death scenarios. I rolled my eyes, but couldn't quite suppress the spark of intrigue burning in my chest. Fine, but if this turns out to be some elaborate historical society prank, I'm holding you personally responsible. Deal? Cleo beamed, already typing furiously on her phone. Operation Missing Manuscript is officially underway. As we walked toward the main library, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Something obvious hiding in plain sight, like a book on the wrong shelf. And in Ravenswood, misplaced things had a troubling tendency to resurface in the most inconvenient ways. Chapter 2. Don't Dewey that again. I stepped out into the crisp autumn air, my messenger bag banging against my hip with each reluctant step. Cleo bounced beside me like an over-caffeinated terrier, her blonde ponytail swinging as she gestured animatedly. So, I'm thinking we need a proper investigation aesthetic, she was saying. Something between academic sleuths and vintage detectives. Maybe I'll get us matching notebooks? Or tote bags with magnifying glasses? I already have a perfectly functional notebook, I said, patting my bag where my journal of fictional deaths nestled against library paperwork and a half-eaten granola bar. And the only thing I'm investigating is whether this was all an elaborate prank by bored teenagers. But Cleo wasn't listening. Did you know in the Cold Case Cartographers podcast, episode 73, they found an entire town conspiracy through marginalia in library books? The killer had been highlighting specific words for years. I sighed as we rounded the corner toward Maple Street, where the old Historical Society building loomed like a disapproving grandmother. The once grand Victorian now sported peeling lavender paint, cracked windows, and a porch that sagged in the middle like an exhausted midsection. Are you even listening? Cleo poked my arm. Marginalia? Killer. Highlighting. Yes, I said absently, eyeing the building with growing trepidation. Why did I tell you about that note again? Because deep down, you know I'm your Watson, she replied instantly. I'm not anyone's Holmes. More like Jessica Fletcher with a superiority complex, she grinned. I resent that comparison, I muttered, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. Jessica Fletcher was an incorrigible busybody who inexplicably encountered murder rates higher than most war zones. And what would you call our murder statistics in Ravenswood lately? Statistical anomalies, I said firmly. Beside the point, are we sure this place is even open to the public? The Historical Society disbanded after that fundraising scandal 3 years ago. A smug smile spread across Cleo's face as she reached into her cardigan pocket and produced a set of tarnished brass keys with a flourish. My Aunt Gertrude was treasurer, never asked for the keys back after the big split. Apple fritters, Cleo! That's breaking and entering. It's entering with obsolete permission, she corrected, already scaling the creaking steps. Technically different. The key stuck twice before the lock gave with a reluctant groan. The door swung inward, releasing a cloud of dust that danced in the late afternoon sunlight like malevolent glitter. I sneezed twice in rapid succession. This place looks abandoned. We stepped into what had once been a reception area. Glass display cases stood empty except for a few forgotten placards. Faded maps of Ravenswood through the decades hung askew on wood-paneled walls. Everything smelled faintly of mildew and old paper. According to my aunt, the archives should still be in the back, Cleo whispered, her excitement momentarily tempered by the tomb-like atmosphere. We picked our way across the entrance hall, floorboards protesting loudly beneath our weight. A particularly ominous creak made me wince. Son of a snickerdoodle, this place is one structural inspection away from being condemned, I muttered, stepping gingerly over a suspicious-looking water stain. But think of all the historical secrets just waiting to be. I clasped my hand over Cleo's mouth as raised voices suddenly echoed from somewhere ahead. Gripping her cardigan, I pulled her behind an enormous bookcase just as two elderly women appeared around the corner. I recognized them immediately. Midge Halberd, former chair of the Historical Society, sporting her trademark tweed blazer with leather elbow patches. Opposite her stood Enid Burble, clutching what appeared to be several manila folders and a neon pink highlighter. Your theories are as outlandish as your highlighter collection, Enid. Midge jabbed a bony finger toward the other woman. No one's erasing your precious family history because there's nothing to erase. Enid's face contorted with indignation, her free hand trembling as she adjusted her thick glasses. The Voss line connects directly to mine. That book proves it, which is exactly why it vanished. Paranoid nonsense, Midge hissed. And if I catch you in here again without permission, I'm calling that detective, the handsome grumpy one who doesn't believe in trespassing. With that parting shot, Midge stormed toward the exit, slamming the front door hard enough that a shower of dust rained down on us. I sneezed again, giving away our position completely. Enid whirled toward us, highlighter brandished like a tiny fluorescent weapon. Who's there? I'm warning you, I took self-defense in 1987. Before I could formulate a reasonable explanation for our presence, Cleo stepped forward with a dazzling smile. Mrs. Burble, we were just doing some research. What book were you talking about? I pinched the bridge of my nose. Subtle as a marching band, that one. Research? Enid squinted suspiciously. Are you with the council or the university? Library, I said, stepping forward with my most professional demeanor. Virginia Varnell, head librarian. This is my colleague, Cleo Larson. We're cataloging historical donations. Enid lowered her highlighter marginally. The library, eh? Well, at least you're not Lyle's cronies, she sniffed. Though what you're doing in a closed building is beyond me. We have permission, Cleo said brightly, jangling her aunt's keys. I couldn't help overhearing, you mentioned a missing book. I expected Enid to dismiss us, but something in her posture changed. Her eyes darted toward the windows, then back to us. You found something, didn't you? A note? A reference? The sudden intensity in her gaze made me uncomfortable. We're just doing preliminary research on town donations. I know what preliminary research means, Enid said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Come with me, quickly, before someone sees us. She led us through a narrow hallway into what must have been the main archive room. Freestanding shelves created a labyrinth of dusty tomes and document boxes. The air felt heavy with the weight of forgotten histories. The Foundations of Ravenswood, Enid began without preamble, was an 1876 volume documenting the town's original charter, land grants, and most importantly, the genealogies of founding families. As she spoke, her right hand flitted nervously between folders, tapping the edges with her highlighter. It proves my direct descent from Isabel Voss, co-founder of Ravenswood and rightful owner of the Northern Quarter properties. Properties that now belong to? I prompted. The Catterwick Trust, Enid spat. My cousin Lyle sits on the town council, controls the trust, and has been fighting my research for years. He can't stand the thought of sharing the Catterwick family glory or, God forbid, relinquishing property rights. And the book just disappeared? Cleo asked, wide-eyed. 3 years ago, right before the Historical Society disbanded. Enid nodded vigorously. Very convenient timing, don't you think? She led us to a metal filing cabinet and yanked open the second drawer. I've been recreating the evidence from other sources. Lyle thinks I'm just a crackpot with too many highlighters, but I'm getting closer. She rifled through files before pulling out a dusty binder labeled Acquisitions 1980 to 1990. Here, she said, flipping to a specific page. See for yourself. We leaned in. I could indeed see an entry from 1989. Foundations of Ravenswood, 1876, donated by H. Voss, with the name hastily scratched out and initialed by someone with a small, precise LC. I glanced at Cleo, whose eyebrows had shot up nearly to her hairline. LC, I murmured. Lyle Catterwick? The same cousin you just accused? If I go missing, Enid said with dramatic intensity, blame the council and my cousin Lyle. He's been fighting my research for years. Her phone chirped suddenly, causing all three of us to jump. Enid checked the screen and frowned. I need to take this. Don't touch anything, but don't leave either. The moment she stepped into the hallway, I slipped my phone from my pocket and quickly photographed the redacted ledger page. This is wild, Cleo whispered, peering over my shoulder. You think her conspiracy theory is real? I think she believes it's real, I replied, which isn't the same thing. Through the doorway, I could see Enid gesticulating wildly as she spoke into her phone, free hand still clutching her beloved highlighter. Time to make a graceful exit, I murmured, nudging Cleo toward the door. We managed to slip away with minimal awkwardness, though Enid's distracted farewell felt more like a warning than a goodbye. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across Main Street. I looked back at the Historical Society building and saw Enid through the grimy window, hunched over documents, frantically highlighting and glancing over her shoulder every few seconds. That woman's paranoia would put conspiracy theorists to shame, I said, shaking my head as we walked back toward the library. Or maybe she's on to something huge, Cleo countered. Either way, I'm starting to regret showing you that note. No, you're not, Cleo grinned, linking her arm through mine. You're intrigued. I can tell by your left eyebrow. My hand flew to my face. Stop saying that. Later that evening, I sat cross-legged on my sofa, journal open on my lap. Morticia prowled restlessly along the windowsill, her black tail flicking in silent judgment of the world beyond the glass. What do you think, Mort? I asked, watching her yellow eyes track something invisible in the darkness. Small-town grudge or genuine conspiracy? She blinked slowly at me before turning back to her vigil. My thoughts exactly. Morticia had always had an uncanny sense for trouble, appearing precisely when death lurked nearby. I'd stopped questioning it years ago, accepting her mysterious timing as just another quirk of our unusual partnership. I turned to a fresh page and uncapped my fountain pen, letting the nib hover for a moment before the words flowed. The weight of history crushes some, while others manipulate its pages. How fitting for a researcher to become buried in their own obsessive pursuit, suffocated by the very truth they sought to uncover. I frowned at the page. My morbid musings were getting repetitive lately, circling around themes of burial and hidden truths. Perhaps Enid's conspiracy theories were affecting me more than I cared to admit. The cat's ears suddenly flattened against her head, and she hissed at the empty air. What's gotten into you? I murmured. But Morticia only stared intently at the shadows, seeing something I couldn't. Chapter 3. She died doing what she loved. Annotating. 2 days after finding that cryptic note, I woke up before dawn with Enid's argument still rattling in my head. The accusation against her cousin, that hastily redacted donation record, it was the kind of small-town intrigue I usually found tedious. And yet, this is ridiculous, I muttered to Morticia, who blinked at me from her perch on my dresser. I'm not getting involved in historical society drama. My cat stared back with knowing indifference. 30 minutes later, I was pulling into the empty parking lot of the Historical Society, clutching a travel mug of tea I hadn't touched. The building, a weathered Victorian that had probably been handsome a century ago, stood silent in the early morning mist. I'd convinced myself this was just professional curiosity. After all, the library occasionally received overflow documents from the Society, purely research-related, nothing to do with cryptic notes or paranoid genealogists. As I approached the front steps, something caught my eye. The heavy oak door stood slightly ajar. Not wide open, just unlatched. A detail that immediately prickled the hair on the back of my neck. "Hello?" I called, pushing the door wider. It creaked dramatically, like every door in a Gothic novel apparently must. No answer. I considered leaving, the sensible option, but instead, I stepped inside, telling myself Enid was probably already here, deep in her research paranoia, forgetting basic security protocols. "Enid?" It's Virginia Varnell from the library. The interior felt different than yesterday. Heavier somehow, as though the air itself had been disturbed. Dust motes swirled in the shafts of early morning light filtering through grimy windows. I moved cautiously through the main floor, my footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. "Anyone here?" When no one answered, I debated leaving. This wasn't my building, after all, and certainly not my mystery to solve. Yet something pulled me toward the back of the building, where I knew additional archives were stored below. The basement door stood open. Just a sliver of darkness, but an invitation nonetheless. "Hello? Anyone down there?" I called down the staircase, fumbling along the wall for a light switch. If this is some kind of historical society prank, it's about as funny as Dewey Decimal humor. My fingers found the switch, and weak fluorescent lights flickered to life. The wooden stairs creaked beneath my weight as I descended, each step seeming to announce my presence to the silent basement. The musty smell hit me first. Old paper, dust, and something else, something slightly damp. The space was cramped with tall metal shelving units packed with boxes, folders, and loose papers. A leaky pipe somewhere dripped with metronomic precision, the only sound besides my own breathing. "Enid?" I just wanted to ask a few follow-up questions about. I rounded a tall shelf of archival boxes and stopped dead. Oh, fudge pops. Enid Burble lay motionless on the concrete floor, partially buried under toppled boxes and scattered papers. Her body was twisted at an awkward angle, one arm outstretched as if reaching for something. The neon pink highlighter she always carried was still uncapped, stuck to her palm like a bizarre extension of her hand. Her reading glasses lay snapped beside her face. "Enid?" I whispered, though I already knew. I crouched beside her, careful not to disturb anything, while checking for a pulse I was certain I wouldn't find. Her skin was cool to the touch, her eyes fixed on nothing. "Holy chocolate souffle!" I breathed, withdrawing my hand. That's when I noticed what her outstretched fingers were clutching. A yellowed page with ornate lettering, clearly torn from a much older book. Without touching it, I could make out the header. Voss-Catterwick Agreement, 1876. A horrible realization dawned on me as I took in the full scene. The scattered papers covering Enid's body, the research materials crushing her, the way she appeared to have literally drowned in footnotes. It mirrored what I'd written in my journal last night with sickening precision. Crushed by your own footnotes, buried beneath years of obsession and a story no one else believed. My stomach lurched. This wasn't the first time my morbid journaling had preceded an actual death, but the synchronicity never failed to chill me to the bone. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called 911. "I need to report," my voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I'm at the Ravenswood Historical Society. I found a woman, non-responsive. I think she's dead." The dispatcher's calm voice asked me to stay on the line until help arrived. I agreed, though every instinct screamed for me to run. While I waited, my eyes kept returning to that page in Enid's hand. Without contaminating the scene, I couldn't examine it properly, but my librarian's curiosity was overwhelming. I leaned closer, careful not to touch anything, and snapped several quick photos with my phone. The page contained partial genealogies and what appeared to be a property map with the name Voss circled in faded ink. Voss, the same name that had been scratched out in the ledger. My mind raced through possibilities. The Historical Society materials had recently been processed at our library by Ellie Voss. With her white gloves and meticulous attention to detail, Had she encountered something in those materials connected to Enid's research? I made a mental note to review what she'd cataloged when this nightmare was over. 7 minutes later, sirens wailed in the distance. 3 minutes after that, the basement filled with uniforms, radios crackling, cameras flashing, evidence markers being placed by gloved hands. I stood off to the side, arms wrapped around myself, watching the methodical deconstruction of a death scene. That's when I saw him. Detective Alexander Stone strode down the basement steps, ducking his head to avoid a low-hanging pipe. His tall frame cast a long shadow across the floor, his gray eyes immediately scanning the room with clinical precision before landing on me. Recognition, then suspicion. Ms. Varnell. He approached with measured steps. Somehow, I'm not surprised to find you at another crime scene. I bristled. I found her by accident. Accident, he repeated, the word somehow gaining 3 additional syllables of skepticism in his mouth. Just like the Stillwater incident last spring, or the business with the bookstore owner in December? Stone led me to a corner away from the bustle of the crime scene techs, pulling out a small notebook that I noticed was leather-bound and well-worn, a detail I immediately fixated on to avoid looking at his razor-sharp gaze. What brought you to the Historical Society at 7 in the morning? His tone was conversational, but I wasn't fooled. I explained about the argument I'd witnessed yesterday, the redacted ledger, my professional curiosity. Professional curiosity, he repeated. Each time Stone echoed my words back to me, they sounded increasingly implausible. Yes, detective. Libraries and historical societies often share resources. I wanted to follow up on some archival questions before my shift. And the door was open when you arrived? Not wide open, just unlatched. Did you touch anything in the building? Move anything? I hesitated a fraction too long. Just checked for a pulse. His eyes narrowed slightly. He caught the hesitation. Of course he did. Nothing else? You didn't touch any papers? Any of the material surrounding the victim? No. The lie felt leaden on my tongue. I hadn't touched anything, but I had photographed evidence. I wondered if that was technically tampering. Stone made a note, his pen scratching softly against paper. And what was your relationship with Ms. Burble? Barely acquaintances. I knew her from library visits. She was researching local genealogy. Any idea who would want to harm her? I thought of her dramatic warning. She mentioned her cousin Lyle yesterday. Said if anything happened to her, he should be blamed. He's on the town council, apparently. Stone's eyebrows lifted slightly. She predicted her own murder? She was paranoid, I said carefully, always talking about conspiracies and cover-ups. Most people in town thought she was... I trailed off, suddenly remembering that speaking ill of the recently deceased was both tactless and suspicious. Thought she was what, Ms. Varnell? Eccentric, I finished lamely. One of the officers approached, murmuring something to Stone. He nodded, then turned back to me. We'll need to take your statement more formally at the station. But first, standard procedure. We need to check any personal items you have with you. My heart sank. I have my purse and my phone. The female officer who'd materialized beside Stone held out her hand. May I? Reluctantly, I handed over my bag. She began methodically removing its contents. Keys, wallet, chapstick, phone, and... What's this? She asked, pulling out my leather-bound journal. My stomach dropped to somewhere around my ankles. My personal journal. Stone's interest visibly sharpened. Mind if I take a look? It wasn't really a question. Before I could protest, he'd taken the journal and begun flipping through the most recent entries, his expression darkening with each page. When he reached yesterday's entry, he stopped. Some people drown in emotion, others drown in the truth. But the most poetic end? To be crushed by your own footnotes, buried beneath years of obsession, and a story no one else believed. He read aloud, voice hollow. His eyes met mine, cold and calculating. You wrote this yesterday? before Mrs. Burble died exactly this way? It's just, I write fiction, dark scenarios. It helps me process things. The explanation sounded weak even to my own ears. Process things, he repeated. That echo again. Like how someone might be murdered? It's coincidence, I said, though the word felt inadequate for the cosmic joke being played at my expense. That's quite a coincidence, Ms. Varnell, especially since this isn't the first time you've been connected to a death in Ravenswood. I had no good answer for that. Stone closed the journal. I'll need to keep this as evidence. Evidence of what? I didn't do anything. My voice rose despite my best efforts. I didn't say you did, Stone replied, maddeningly calm. But you're officially a person of interest in this investigation. Don't leave town without informing the department. Person of interest? I nearly choked. Because I write dark scenarios in a private journal? Because you discovered the body, had prior interaction with the deceased regarding sensitive materials, and wrote a detailed description of her death before it occurred. Stone tucked my journal into an evidence bag. We'll be in touch about your formal statement. Dismissed and deeply shaken, I climbed back up the basement stairs. The main floor was now filled with additional officers, crime scene tape being stretched across doorways, curious neighbors beginning to gather outside. I slipped through the front door, avoiding the growing crowd as best I could. The morning had turned bright and clear, mockingly beautiful for such a grim day. As I approached my car, something caught my eye. A cream-colored envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, I slid the envelope from under the wiper and opened it. Inside was a typewritten note on aged paper. Now you see why some books should stay buried. The curator is watching. My head snapped up, eyes scanning the gathered onlookers. Was the killer among them, watching my reaction, evaluating my next move? I quickly pocketed the note, my heart hammering against my ribs. Someone had deliberately placed this on my car while I was inside discovering Enid's body. Someone who knew what I would find before I found it. As I examined it more closely in my car, I noticed the paper was identical to the note I'd found in the ledger, cream-colored with a subtle texture, deliberately aged to appear vintage. The typeface matched too, slightly uneven characters from what must be the same antique typewriter. Whoever the curator was, they were consistent in their presentation, if nothing else. As I slid behind the wheel, I caught Detective Stone watching me from the Historical Society's front steps, his expression unreadable. I started the engine and pulled away, the note burning in my pocket like a brand. The curator was watching, and now so was Detective Stone. Chapter 4. Snoop and Tell. I couldn't stop pacing. 7 steps from my kitchen to the living room window, pivot, 7 steps back. Morticia tracked my movement from atop the tallest bookshelf, her green eyes narrowed to judgmental slits. Don't look at me like that, I muttered. You weren't the one interrogated by Detective Stone today. Morticia's tail flicked once, eloquent in its dismissal. The curator's note burned in my pocket where I'd transferred it, unable to bring myself to dispose of it, yet unwilling to give it a proper home. Evidence of something. But what, exactly? And more importantly, was it evidence I should hand over to Stone? My phone buzzed again, the 7th time in the past hour. I didn't need to check to know it was Cleo. I glanced at the screen anyway. Emergency sleuthing session! All caps, 3 exclamation points. Cleo's text-based equivalent of a 5-alarm fire. With a sigh that felt like it started somewhere around my toes, I typed back, where and when. The response was immediate. Library, 8 p.m. I have something! More exclamation points. I contemplated ignoring it, making tea, and reading something mind-numbing, until I could forget that I'd found a dead woman posed exactly like the scene I'd written in my journal just yesterday. What do you think, Mort? Should I go? Morticia blinked slowly, then deliberately turned her back to me and began grooming her tail. Helpful as always, I said dryly. I grabbed my coat and keys. Even Cleo's sugar-fueled investigation theories were better than another night alone with my thoughts. The library parking lot was nearly empty when I pulled in at 7:58. Only 2 cars remained, mine and Cleo's candy apple red compact, beside which my assistant was quite literally bouncing on her toes, a blur of pastel cardigan and barely contained excitement in the gathering dusk. "V! Thank cupcakes you came!" She rushed over as I got out, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "I have a breakthrough!" Inside voice, Cleo? "We're in a public parking lot." "But the library's closed," she whispered conspiratorially, then immediately undermined herself by squealing and producing something from her pocket with a theatrical flourish. It was a key, brass, antique-looking, attached to a faded ribbon that might once have been royal blue. "What am I looking at?" I asked, though my librarian instincts immediately evaluated it as pre-1950s, likely awarded lock design. "My aunt didn't just have historical society keys," Cleo explained, her eyes gleaming in the dim security lighting. "She was on the records committee, too. And guess what? Council Records Room 3B is where they keep all the juicy controversial stuff." I stared at her. "Are you suggesting we break into town hall?" "It's not breaking in if you have a key," she countered, dangling it between us. "Besides, don't you want to know what the Catterwick-Voss connection is? Why Enid was so worked up? What the book might reveal?" Of course I did. That was the problem. "Cleo, Detective Stone already thinks I'm involved in Enid's death. If we get caught—" "We won't! Town hall security is a joke after 6 p.m. Just the night watchman, and he always does his rounds on the half-hour. We'll be in and out." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "This is possibly the worst idea you've ever had." "So that's a yes?" She beamed. "If we get arrested for breaking and entering, I'm telling Detective Stone you kidnapped me," I muttered, reluctantly following her to her car. "That's the spirit!" Cleo chirped, unlocking her doors with a cheerful beep that seemed inappropriately loud for our impending criminal activity. Town Hall was a grand limestone edifice that managed to look simultaneously imposing and provincial. During the day, it bustled with minor bureaucrats and citizens paying parking tickets. After hours, it loomed against the night sky like something from a Gothic novel, all shadowed corners and implicit threat. "Park around back," I instructed as we approached, my stomach nodding. "By the service entrance." "Look at you, all mission, impossible," Cleo whispered with obvious delight. "Just being practical," I countered, though my heart hammered as we crept toward the service door, ducking beneath the windows to avoid the security cameras I knew were mounted above. Cleo produced her aunt's key with a flourish that made me want to smack her hand down. This wasn't fun. This was criminal trespassing, and every instinct screamed that we'd regret it. The key slid into the lock with unexpected ease, turning smoothly as if recently oiled. The door swung open without so much as a creak. "See? Meant to be," Cleo whispered. The interior was dimly lit by emergency lighting. Our footsteps echoed across the marble-tiled rotunda, each click of our heels announcing our presence to the emptiness. I winced at the sound, trying to step lighter as we made our way down a corridor of identical wooden doors with frosted glass panels. "Which one is records?" I whispered. "3B," Cleo murmured back, scanning the nameplates. "Should be here." She stopped before a nondescript door with records annex stenciled in fading black paint on its glass panel. The door was locked, but Cleo's key worked here too, which struck me as suspiciously convenient. The room beyond was a bureaucratic nightmare. Industrial metal shelves packed with dusty boxes and aging file cabinets, all illuminated by fluorescent tubes that flickered and buzzed like trapped insects. "How appropriately ominous!" I deadpanned, as Cleo immediately began scanning the labeled sections. "We need to find anything related to the Catterwick and Voss families," she said, all business now. "Or town charter disputes." I moved methodically along the shelves, checking labels and ignoring the prickling sensation between my shoulder blades that made me want to glance behind me every few seconds. It was just leftover nerves from finding Enid, I told myself. Nothing more. "V, over here!" Cleo called softly from the far corner. She stood before a gunmetal gray filing cabinet. Unlike the others, this one had a padlock securing the bottom drawer, which was labeled in neat block letters. Controversies. Locked, I murmured, jiggling the padlock uselessly. Cleo grinned and produced a small leather pouch from her cardigan pocket. Inside was a collection of skeleton keys in varying sizes. Librarians aren't the only ones with access tricks, she winked, kneeling to try several keys in succession. Where did you get those? I hissed. My aunt, she replied, as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. The fifth key slid in smoothly, and the padlock opened with a satisfying click. Cleo pulled the drawer open, revealing a row of neatly organized folders. Jackpot, she whispered. I rifled through the files, scanning labels, mostly zoning disputes and ethics violations, until my fingers closed on a thick manila folder that felt heavy with significance. Catterwick v. Voss, 1990 to 1992, sealed by council vote. This is it, I said, pulling it out and laying it on a nearby desk. Inside were legal documents, correspondence, and photocopied records detailing a bitter dispute that had apparently consumed Ravenswood for nearly 2 years. The question of who truly authored Ravenswood's town charter. The prestigious Catterwick family, whose name graced half the buildings in town, or the lesser-known Voss family, with allegations of plagiarism flying in both directions. Enid's last name was Burble, Cleo whispered, reading over my shoulder. Where's the connection? I flipped through more papers and found it. A family tree showing that Enid's maternal grandmother was Eleanor Voss, who married a Burble in 1937. She was a Voss by blood, I said. That's why she cared so much. She was trying to prove her family's rightful place in Ravenswood history. And someone didn't want that proven, Cleo added, eyes wide. I continued scanning, photographing key documents with my phone as I went. Then a particular letter caught my eye. Correspondence between the town attorney and the judge, mentioning foundations of Ravenswood as decisive evidence that could settle the dispute once and for all. But the book had mysteriously disappeared before the case concluded, resulting in a stalemate. Jam jars, I whispered, the pieces clicking together. Enid wasn't crazy. The book would prove her Voss connection. As we examined the records, I remembered our library's recent collaboration with Town Hall. The Historical Society overflow? I murmured, more to myself than to Cleo. What about it? Cleo asked, looking up from the file. When the society disbanded, their records were split between Town Hall and our library. Ellie's been cataloging our portion for months. I tapped the file thoughtfully. I wonder if she's seen anything related to this Catterwick-Voss dispute. We could ask her, Cleo suggested brightly. I hesitated, thinking of the cryptic note. Let's hold off. Something about this feels sensitive. I'd rather understand what we're dealing with first before involving anyone else from the library. Cleo nodded, returning to the documents with renewed focus. A sudden noise froze us both in place. The distant but unmistakable sound of a door closing somewhere in the building. We held our breath, straining to hear. Seconds later, our own door clicked shut, followed by the distinct sound of a key turning in the lock. Cleo's eyes widened to saucers as she whispered, "Did someone just—" I rushed to the door, twisting the handle uselessly. "We're locked in," I confirmed, the calm in my voice belying the panic bubbling beneath. "Try your keys." Cleo fumbled with her skeleton keys, attempting each one in the lock. "None of them fit this door from the inside," she said, voice rising in pitch. "Call your aunt," I instructed, scanning the room for another exit. There was a small window, but it was barred from the outside, a security measure that now felt distinctly threatening. As Cleo called her aunt, whispering desperate explanations, I noticed a cream-colored envelope that had been slipped under the door. With shaking fingers, I picked it up and slid out another typewritten note. "You're not the only one who reads between the lines. The curator is still watching. My throat went dry. "Someone knows we're here," I said, showing Cleo the note. "Someone who called themselves the curator in that first note I found." "What does it mean?" reads between the lines, Cleo asked, her usual exuberance dimmed by genuine fear. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think we've stumbled into something bigger than a missing book." I held the note up to the light. Same cream-colored paper, same typewriter. Whoever was sending these was meticulous about maintaining a consistent aesthetic, almost like they were creating a brand for their threats. "My aunt isn't answering," Cleo said, clutching her phone. "What do we do? Call the police?" I hesitated. Explaining why we were locked in a restricted room after hours, handling sealed files, would be difficult at best. Add in my status as a person of interest in Enid's death, and it became potentially disastrous. "Let's wait a few minutes," I decided. Whoever locked us in might come back, and I'd rather confront them directly than bring Detective Stone into this right now. 20 minutes crawled by, tense and silent, except for the buzzing fluorescence above. Then, finally, footsteps approached from down the hall. Measured, unhurried, confident. The lock turned, and the door swung open to reveal Lyle Catterwick, town council member, and, I now knew, Enid's cousin. He wore an expensive suit despite the late hour, and his normally composed face registered genuine shock at finding us inside. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, quickly recovering and adjusting his cufflinks nervously. "This room is restricted to authorized personnel." I stepped forward, clutching the case file we'd been reviewing, and met his gaze directly. "Funny coincidence finding you here after hours, Mr. Catterwick, especially with your cousin dead and this file about your family's disputed legacy open on the table." His face drained of color, before hardening into something more controlled. "You're trespassing on government property. I could have you both arrested." "For what?" "Finding evidence of why someone might want Enid dead?" I pushed, watching his eyes dart to the documents in my hand. "She was trying to prove her Voss heritage, wasn't she? And that would undermine the Catterwick claim to Ravenswood's founding." Lyle's hands trembled slightly as he again adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous tell if I'd ever seen one. "I don't know what nonsense Enid filled your head with, but the Catterwick contribution to this town is well documented and beyond dispute." "Is it? Because these court records suggest otherwise," I said, waving the file. "And the definitive proof was in a book that conveniently disappeared, a book Enid was looking for when she died." "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snapped, eyes fixed on the file. "And if you don't leave immediately, I'll call security and report you for breaking and entering." "How do you think that will look to Detective Stone, considering your connection to Enid's death?" The threat hung in the air, effective in its precision. Behind me, Cleo made a small, distressed sound. "We're leaving," I said finally, tucking the file under my arm. "But I'm taking this with me." "That's town property," Lyle protested, reaching for it. I stepped back. "And I'm the town librarian. Consider it an interlibrary loan." I pushed past him, Cleo following close behind. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we'll see ourselves out. Unless you'd prefer to explain to the police why you were lurking in town hall after hours, locking people in rooms?" It was a gambit, and I knew it. But Lyle's fear of exposure seemed greater than his desire to reclaim the file. He stood aside, face contorted with barely controlled anger. "This isn't over," he warned as we hurried past him. "No," I agreed, clutching the evidence of decades-old betrayal and possibly recent murder. "It certainly isn't." As we reached the exit, still shaking with adrenaline and the certainty we'd narrowly avoided something worse than discovery, one question burned in my mind. Was Lyle Catterwick the curator? Or was someone else pulling his strings, using old rivalries and buried truths to orchestrate a modern murder? Chapter 5. Past Imperfect. The bell above the door of Past Perfect Antiques chimed with elegant restraint, the kind of restrained tinkling that made it clear this wasn't some tacky gift shop, but a refined establishment. I stepped inside, immediately struck by how different it felt from the Historical Society's chaotic basement. Where the Society was dusty chaos, Gavin Morrow's domain was meticulous order. Polished wood floors gleamed under precisely arranged display cases. Every item bore a laminated tag with pristine handwritten descriptions. Even the Baroque jazz, playing softly through hidden speakers, felt calculated rather than chosen. Appraising the merchandise or just the decor? A voice asked from behind me. I managed not to jump, but it was a near thing. For a man who polished everything to within an inch of its life, Gavin Morrow moved with surprising stealth. "Ms. Varnell," he acknowledged, giving me a thin smile while smoothing down his already impeccable charcoal vest. "What brings our local librarian to my humble establishment? Looking to upgrade your collection, perhaps?" His tone suggested my library's collection needed upgrading, which I resented on principle. "Just browsing," I lied, then decided against the charade. I'd never been good at the innocent act. Honesty was a more effective weapon in my experience. I reached into my bag and produced the bookplate fragment I'd pried from a cracked desk drawer at the Historical Society, presenting it with deliberate casualness. "Actually, I'm trying to identify this bookplate style. Thought you might recognize it, given your expertise." I watched his reaction carefully. His eyes widened slightly before his expression snapped back to practiced neutrality. He reached for the fragment with gloved hands, which I noted he was already wearing indoors. Odd or fastidious, or both. "May I?" he asked, though he'd already taken it. He examined the fragment under a jeweler's loupe he produced from his pocket, with the smooth efficiency of someone who handled rare objects for a living. "Interesting choice to bring this to me," he said after a moment, voice tinged with something between amusement and condescension. "Especially given recent, unfortunate events. You heard about Enid Burble?" "I make it my business to know what happens in Ravenswood," Gavin replied, still studying the fragment. "Particularly when it involves historical artifacts. And death." The way he said death sounded like he was referring to a mildly distasteful cheese selection rather than a woman being suffocated under archival papers. "Follow me," he said abruptly, turning toward the back of the shop. I hesitated, momentarily weighing the wisdom of following a potential suspect into a room full of antique weapons and heavy objects. But my curiosity won out, as it usually did. The back room was even more meticulously organized than the front, with glass-fronted cabinets and climate-controlled display cases. Gavin unlocked a drawer containing bookbinding tools, professional-grade equipment arranged with mathematical precision. "There," he said, pointing to a brass embossing stamp nestled in its own velvet-lined compartment. The pattern was unmistakable, ornate ivy surrounding a stylized RHS monogram. It matched the fragment exactly. The Ravenswood Historical Society's official mark from the 1970s through early 1990s, Gavin explained, his tone shifting to professional lecture mode. "Quite distinctive. One of their more elegant designs, in my opinion." I reached for the stamp, wanting to examine it more closely, but Gavin subtly shifted it away, continuing his explanation. "They commissioned only 12 books with this particular plate before the design was retired. Most remain in their collection, though I've handled 2 privately over the years." His tone was informative, but carried an undercurrent of smugness that made me want to roll my eyes. "So, Foundations of Ravenswood would have had this plate?" I asked directly, tired of the roundabout deal. Gavin's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Ah, you're looking into poor Enid's obsession." The way he said obsession made it clear what he thought of Enid's research interests. "That particular volume has quite the colorful history of appearing and disappearing," he continued, returning the stamp to its drawer with unnecessary precision. "Never owned it myself, though not for lack of trying." "Who would want that book enough to steal it? Or enough to kill for it?" I asked, watching his face. Gavin's expression remained neutral, but his fingers twitched slightly as he relocked the drawer. "History is valuable to those who understand it, Ms. Varnell." He straightened up. You know who might have more insight? Eleanor Voss. Ellie. She's been handling donations at your library for what, 6 months now? I kept my face blank, though my mind was rapidly connecting dots I hadn't seen before. Ellie Voss. I'd hired her myself, impressed by her meticulous attention to detail and background in preservation. Quiet, efficient Ellie, with her perpetual gloves and whispered voice. Ellie, who had specifically requested to process all historical materials that came through our doors. Fascinating coincidence, given her family name appears in the disputed records, Gavin added. The implication hit me like a physical blow. How had I missed it? Voss, the same name from the redacted records. I'd never questioned why someone with her qualifications would take a part-time position at our modest library. I thought back to Ellie's meticulous processing work, how she'd volunteered to catalog the Historical Society donations when they arrived, how she always wore archival gloves, even when working with modern paperbacks, claiming it was better for preservation. I'm not sure I follow, I said, playing dumb, a tactic I generally despised, but occasionally found useful. Gavin smiled thinly. Genealogy can be a passionate pursuit, Ms. Varnell. People go to extraordinary lengths to protect or restore family honor. And the Voss family needed restoration? I'm merely an antiques dealer, not a historian. Gavin deflected smoothly, then produced a small note card with elegant handwriting. Since you're investigating, you might want to speak with these individuals as well. The card listed 5 names, 2 town council members, former Historical Society volunteers, and what I recognized as an antiques competitor from 2 towns over. Notably absent was Gavin's own name. Just being a responsible citizen, he added, with that same thin smile. How thoughtful, I said, matching his insincerity as I pocketed the card. And did you share this list with Detective Stone? The detective hasn't requested my assistance yet, Gavin replied, though I'm always happy to help local law enforcement, when asked properly. As I prepared to leave, my mind racing with implications about Ellie Voss and her possible connection to the missing book, Gavin called after me. Oh, and Ms. Varnell? I turned back, hand already on the doorknob. Do be careful with those journal entries of yours. I hear they've become quite predictive. I froze, ice sliding down my spine. My journal entries were private, or should have been. I'd never shown them to anyone except Morticia, and she, being a cat, was famously discreet. When I whirled around, startled, Gavin added smoothly, Small town talk travels fast, especially about librarians who find bodies. I left without responding, the bell chiming softly behind me. The morning had grown colder, or perhaps it was just the chill of having my privacy violated in such a specific way. Walking back to my car, I added Ellie's name to my mental suspect list while reviewing what just happened. Gavin knew too much while revealing too little. Classic misdirection. But was he protecting himself or someone else? And how did he know about my journal? I started the car, automatic motions, while my brain worked through the implications. Ellie Voss, a descendant of a founding family whose reputation had apparently needed restoration. A quiet woman who processed donations, who would have had access to the missing book before anyone noticed it was gone. Who wore gloves constantly, for preservation purposes, she always said, or to hide fingerprints. I needed to look at Ellie with fresh eyes. Her peculiar habits, the archival gloves she wore even when handling modern books, her insistence on processing donations alone, her tendency to speak in whispers, had seemed like harmless eccentricities of a dedicated professional. Now they felt like calculated behaviors, designed to avoid leaving evidence. I arrived at the library 20 minutes early for my shift, parking in the back lot where I could observe the staff entrance. If Ellie followed her usual punctual routine, she'd arrive exactly 12 minutes before her shift, not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to be unprofessional. Sure enough, at 9:48, her modest sedan pulled into a spot 3 spaces down from mine. I slouched in my seat, pretending to be engrossed in my phone as she emerged, tucking white gloves into her cardigan pocket. She never wore them while driving, I realized. Only once she entered the library. I waited until she disappeared inside, then gave it another minute before following. Instead of heading directly to the circulation desk, I took the staff stairs to the mezzanine level that overlooked the main floor. From there, I could observe without being obvious. Ellie had already taken her position at the processing desk, white gloves now covering her hands, as she methodically unpacked a donation box. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical in their efficiency. She checked each book against a master list, applied property stamps with careful pressure, then sorted them into categories for cataloging. Nothing unusual there. It was the job she'd been hired to do, and she did it well. Too well, maybe. I watched as she reached a worn hardcover, pausing longer than with the other books. Her gloved fingers traced the spine, then opened it to examine something inside. Whatever she saw made her shoulders tense. She glanced around furtively, then slipped the book into her personal bag, rather than adding it to the processing pile. Well now, that was interesting. I made my way down to the main floor, moving casually toward the circulation desk while keeping Ellie in my peripheral vision. She had returned to processing, her face a mask of concentration. "Morning, Ellie," I said, approaching her desk. She startled slightly, her gloved hands freezing mid-motion over a paperback mystery. "Good morning, Ms. Varnell." "Virginia," I corrected, though I'd done so a dozen times before. She always reverted to formality. "How are the Henderson donations coming along?" "Efficiently," she replied, that single word somehow conveying both pride and dismissal. "Mostly contemporary fiction, though there are several historical references mixed in." "Anything interesting?" I kept my tone casual, glancing at the book she'd just finished processing. "Nothing extraordinary," she said. Then, surprisingly, she volunteered. "Though there was a local history pamphlet from 1967 that mentions the Voss settlement. Quite rare." That caught my attention. She'd never mentioned her family connection to Ravenswood's founders, despite sharing the Voss name. I decided to probe gently. "Voss? Any relation to you?" Her gloved fingers stilled again, just for a moment. "Distant," she admitted. "My grandfather's family." "Local history can be fascinating," I offered. "All those interconnected families and old rivalries." Ellie's expression remained neutral, but I noticed her fingers tighten around the book she held. Some find it so. To others, it's merely record-keeping. "Like the Ravenswood Historical Society archives?" I pushed. "I was just there yesterday, looking into a reference question." Her eyes snapped to mine, then quickly away. "The Society's organizational system is outdated. Their materials deserve better curation." "I heard they're missing some volumes," I continued, watching her carefully, "including one called Foundations of Ravenswood." The book in Ellie's hands slipped, falling to the desk with a soft thud. She recovered quickly, picking it up and smoothing imaginary dust from the cover. "Is that so?" I hadn't heard. The lie was so obvious I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded thoughtfully. "A shame, really. Apparently, it contained important information about the town's founding families, the Vosses included." "Historical records are often unreliable," Ellie said quietly, her voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. "Subject to the biases of whoever recorded them." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced down to see Detective Stone's name on my screen. "Need to talk. Your office." Now, perfect timing as usual. "Excuse me," I said to Ellie. "Duty calls." As I walked away, I glanced back to see her watching me, her gloved hands clutching another book from the donation pile, this one older, leather-bound. Her expression was no longer neutral, but calculating. I had a feeling I'd just kicked a hornet's nest. The question was, would the hornets come after me one by one, or all at once? Chapter 6. Marginalia and Mayhem. I missed my journal already. The leather-bound volume had been my confidant for years, and now it sat in an evidence locker at the police station. Thankfully, I kept several identical journals at home, a librarian's appreciation for backup copies proving useful once again. I'd already started a new one, though I was being more careful about what I committed to paper. I sat cross-legged on my couch, surrounded by a chaotic halo of printouts. My living room looked like it had been caught in a paper tornado, specifically the kind that exclusively targeted conspiracy theorists' blogs. Morticia perched on the armrest beside me, her tail flicking with what I could only interpret as feline judgment regarding my organizational skills. "Don't give me that look," I muttered to her. "This is how investigating works." Morticia blinked slowly, clearly unconvinced. I took another sip of my rapidly cooling chai and scrolled further into the digital rabbit hole of the Ravenswood Truth Seeker, Enid Birble's surprisingly extensive blog. Despite its author now being permanently indisposed, read dead under a pile of archival materials, the site remained live, a digital ghost still shouting into the void. "This woman never met a conspiracy theory she didn't like," I said, as I clicked through another post about how the town's annual Founders' Day celebration was actually a coded ritual to perpetuate historical lies. Morticia gave a soft meow that sounded suspiciously like agreement. The blog was exactly what you'd expect from someone who used more highlighters than a college freshman during finals week. Every other paragraph featured capital letters, excessive exclamation points, and highlighted sections in various neon colors that had somehow translated to the digital medium. Reading it felt like being visually assaulted by someone's unmedicated anxiety. Yet buried beneath the caps lock and paranoia, Enid occasionally stumbled onto something that smelled like actual research. She'd accumulated an impressive archive of historical references, newspaper clippings, and photographs, all meticulously cataloged with her particular brand of manic energy. I clicked back to the archives section, sorting from oldest to newest. If there was a through line to Enid's obsession, maybe it started somewhere rational before veering into "the mayor is hiding lizard DNA" territory. 3 hours and 2 cups of chai later, I was about to call it quits when I spotted a post from 3 years ago with the innocuous title, "Proof of the Great Deception." I clicked it open, expecting another rant about water fluoridation or whatever else kept Enid up at night. Instead, I found myself looking at a scanned page from what appeared to be a much older journal. The yellowed paper and faded ink suggested early 1900s, and the careful penmanship belonged to an era when handwriting was still considered an essential skill rather than a quaint hobby. I leaned closer to my screen, forgetting to breathe for a moment. The entry was dated May 12, 1908, and mentioned Foundations of Ravenswood, the very book that had mysteriously disappeared from our archives. But it was the next line that made my pulse quicken. Along with its corrected town map showing the true property lines before the Catterwick alterations. Catterwick alterations? As in Lyle Catterwick's family? I zoomed in on the scan, squinting at the details. That's when I noticed something else. Faint marginalia in blue ink running along the edges of the page. These annotations weren't part of the original journal. The ink was too modern, the handwriting distinctly different. The notes appeared to reference page numbers and dates that didn't match the visible text, suggesting they were cross-references to another document. "Holy cinnamon rolls," I whispered. Morticia's ears perked up at my blasphemy. My fingers were already dialing before my brain had fully processed what I'd found. "V, it's almost midnight." Cleo's voice came through, muzzy with sleep. "Remember how we said Enid was just a paranoid conspiracy theorist?" I said without preamble. There was a pause, then a rustle of bedsheets. "I'll be there in 20. True to her word, 19 minutes and 46 seconds later, not that I was counting, Cleo arrived at my door in pink flannel pajama pants, a yellow cardigan thrown over a t-shirt that read, "In my defense, I was left unsupervised," and fuzzy slippers shaped like otters. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun secured with what appeared to be a pencil, and she carried her infamous investigation kit. a polka-dotted tote bag that had seen more crime scenes than most rookie cops. "You look like you haven't slept," she announced by way of greeting, pushing past me into the living room. "Ooh, nice paper explosion. Very aesthetic." "It's Enid's blog," I explained, clearing space on the couch. "I've been reading it all evening." "My condolences to your brain cells," Cleo said, already digging into her tote bag. She began extracting an improbable number of items: colored markers, 3 different notebooks, one labeled suspects, one clues, and one simply weird stuff, a roll of red string, push pins, snacks, and what appeared to be a small magnifying glass with rhinestones glued to the handle. "What is all that?" I asked, though I should have known better. "My true crime essentials," she replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You never know what you'll need when you're solving a murder." I chose not to remind her that we worked in a library, not a police procedural. "Look at this," I said instead, turning my laptop toward her. Enid found a journal from 1908 that references the missing book, and there are these strange annotations in the margins. Cleo leaned in, her expression shifting from sleepy enthusiasm to focused concentration, a transformation I'd witnessed countless times, but still found impressive. She studied the screen for a long moment, then rummaged in her tote again, pulling out a laminated sheet covered in what looked like different handwriting samples. "What's that?" I asked. "My marginalia cheat sheet," she said, spreading it across the coffee table. "I started it after we found those creepy notes in the children's books last year. Remember? Someone kept writing alternative endings, where the big bad wolf actually ate everyone." I did remember. We'd never caught the culprit, though I had my suspicions about Mr. Fendley, the retired English teacher who frequently complained that modern children's literature was too soft. "It catalogs common annotation styles," Cleo continued. "People are surprisingly consistent in how they write in margins, their punctuation, abbreviations, even how they connect references." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos until I found the ones I'd taken of the torn page from Enid's hand, the fragment of Foundations of Ravenswood that I'd carefully pocketed before Detective Stone arrived at the crime scene. Was that tampering with evidence? Probably. Did I care? Not when it meant potentially solving a murder before Stone did. I placed my phone next to the laptop screen. "Can you compare these?" Cleo's eyes narrowed as she looked back and forth between the 2 images, occasionally referencing her cheat sheet. Her lips moved silently, tracing the shapes of letters. After several intense minutes, she gasped with all the drama of someone who'd just witnessed a plot twist in her favorite crime podcast. "The handwriting matches!" She pointed excitedly. "Look at the distinctive R. See how it has that little curl? And the way the periods are slightly off-center, almost like commas, but not quite. Whoever annotated this journal also marked up the Foundations fragment." I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the temperature in my apartment. So the same person had access to both documents. "And recently," Cleo added, "that blue ink is modern. Ballpoint, not fountain pen." I grabbed my laptop and opened a new tab, logging into the library's employee database. "Ellie Voss started working at the library 6 months ago," I said, scanning her personnel file. "Quiet, efficient, always wearing those white gloves." The connection suddenly crystallized like ice in my veins. "Voss, the same family name that's been erased from the town records." Cleo's eyes widened. "Oh, my God." "She's been hiding in plain sight," I said, the pieces falling together with alarming speed. "Cataloging our archives, accessing every historical document, probably searching for the missing book that proves her family's claim." Cleo was already typing frantically on her phone. Wait, look!" She thrust the screen toward me, showing the library's donation processing log. "Ellie processed the Historical Society materials the week before the mysterious note appeared. She would have had first access to everything." I stood abruptly, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. "We need to confront her, now!" Cleo caught my arm, her expression unexpectedly serious. "Wait, Ellie's connected. Her uncle sits on the same council as Lyle Catterwick. Remember that whole thing with the budget committee last year? If she is behind this, we need more than handwriting similarities. I hesitated, keys dangling from my fingers. Cleo was right. Accusation without proof wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially dangerous. If Ellie was connected to Enid's death, confronting her without evidence could make us the next victims. And if she had powerful family connections on the council, we need to catch her in the act, I said slowly, returning my keys to their hook. But how? Cleo's face lit up with the particular gleam that always preceded either a brilliant idea or a terrible one. We stake her out. You've been listening to that true crime podcast again, haven't you? It's educational, she defended. But seriously, she works in the library. We know her schedule, her habits. We can observe her discreetly. I considered this. Tomorrow's Friday. She always catalogs new acquisitions after closing on Fridays. Cleo finished my thought. It's the perfect time to watch her without being obvious. We spent the next hour creating a surveillance schedule that would make a professional detective either impressed or horrified. I would pretend to be doing inventory in the stacks near the rare reads room, while Cleo would monitor the main floor from the circulation desk under the guise of processing returns. We should have code names, Cleo suggested as she packed up her investigation kit. I'll be Sunshine, and you can be Raven. We're not having code names. Fine, but I'm bringing walkie-talkies. We have cell phones, Cleo. Walkie-talkies are more authentic. I didn't have the energy to argue further. Just don't wear a trench coat or anything obvious. Please, she scoffed. I'm a professional. And let's keep this between us for now, I added, thinking of the library staff. Especially Ellie. She's been cataloging all the Historical Society overflow materials since she started. If this book is as controversial as it seems, I'd rather keep our investigation quiet until we know more. Cleo nodded sagely. Good point. Though Ellie's so quiet, I sometimes forget she's even there. Those white gloves creep me out a little, if I'm being honest. They're for archival purposes, I said, repeating what Ellie had told me during her interview, though I've never seen anyone wear them for everyday paperbacks. The next evening found me lingering in the stacks long after the library had closed to the public, pretending to be absorbed in shelving while actually keeping one eye on the main floor. I'd told the evening security guard I was catching up on inventory, which wasn't entirely a lie. The library was eerily quiet, with only the occasional creak of settling shelves and the hum of the heating system for company. 8 o'clock passed. Then 8:30. At 8:45, I was beginning to think Ellie might not show up at all. Maybe she'd sensed our suspicion. Maybe we were completely wrong. My phone vibrated with a text from Cleo. Sunshine to Raven. All quiet in Sector 2. I rolled my eyes and didn't bother responding. Another 10 minutes passed. I shelved the same book 3 times, my attention wandering. Just as I was about to call it a night, movement caught my eye. Ellie Voss moved furtively across the main floor, her slight figure almost ghost-like in the dimmed library lighting. As always, white gloves covered her hands, but what drew my attention was the object she clutched protectively to her chest, a book, bound in what looked like aged leather. My heart rate accelerated as I watched her glance around the empty library before approaching the rare reads room. She extracted a key from her pocket, not the standard staff key, but something that looked older, possibly brass, and inserted it into the lock. The door opened with a soft click, and Ellie slipped inside without turning on the lights. The door closed behind her, leaving only darkness within. I texted Cleo. She's in the rare reads room, using a non-standard key. Didn't turn on lights. Her response was immediate. On my way, don't move! But I was already stepping out from between the shelves, drawn toward the rare reads room like a moth to flame. If Ellie had the missing book, if she was hiding evidence connected to Enid's death, this might be our only chance to catch her. I approached the door quietly, my soft-soled shoes making no sound on the carpeted floor. Pressing my ear against the wooden panel, I strained to hear any movement inside. At first, there was nothing. Then, so faint I might have imagined it, The sound of pages turning. Chapter 7. The silence of the stacks. I counted to 30, each second amplifying the thud of blood in my ears. 30 agonizing heartbeats while Ellie Voss did heaven knows what with potentially incriminating evidence inside our most secure collection room. My boots came off with practiced efficiency. The thick carpet would muffle my approach, but the vintage floorboards beneath had a vindictive tendency to announce every visitor with theatrical creaks. Moving with what I hoped was Morticia-worthy stealth, I padded toward the rare reads room, staying close to the wall where the flooring was better anchored. The brass doorknob gleamed dully in the low emergency lighting. I reached for my keys before remembering with a jolt of panic that they hung safely on their hook in my office. Fudgesicle. The door required a staff key, which I'd intentionally left behind to avoid any telltale jingling. Ellie must have locked it behind her. On impulse, I tried the handle anyway. It turned. Either Ellie was supremely confident or supremely careless. Neither option reassured me. I eased the door open just enough to slip through, holding my breath as I stepped into the climate-controlled sanctuary that housed our most valuable texts. Inside, darkness dominated except for a small pool of amber light from Ellie's desk lamp, creating stark islands of illumination surrounded by looming shadows. The tall shelves threw angular patterns across the walls like a German expressionist film set. Moving with painful slowness, I positioned myself behind a glass display case housing our first edition Dickens collection. The case was tall enough to conceal me if I stayed low, yet offered a clear view of Ellie through its glass panels. She stood at her workstation, white-gloved hands moving with methodical precision over something I couldn't quite see. Her posture was unnaturally perfect, her movements economical and practiced. Not once did she glance up or check her surroundings, displaying the absolute confidence of someone who believed themselves completely alone. After a moment, she straightened, lifting what appeared to be a folded sheet of paper. She examined it under the lamp, then nodded to herself, a small, satisfied gesture. Tucking the paper into her palm, Ellie moved with surprising grace toward a shelf of leather-bound volumes on the far wall. Her fingers trailed along the spines until she stopped at a dark green tome. I squinted to make out the gilt lettering, Ravenswood Architecture, 1850 to 1900. Instead of pulling the book from the shelf or opening it where it stood, Ellie did something odd. Her gloved finger pressed against something on the spine, a deliberate, practiced motion, and I heard a soft but distinct click. The book's cover swung outward like a miniature door. Holy cinnamon twists. It was hollow. A jolt of vindication shot through me. These weren't the actions of an innocent librarian assistant. This was someone hiding something, using our collection as her personal dead-drop system. Ellie slipped the folded paper inside the hollowed-out book, her lips moving in what I first thought was a silent count. But as I strained to hear, I caught the faint whisper, "Let the curious find what they deserve." The hair on my arms rose. The temperature in the rare reads room was carefully regulated to preserve the collection, but a different kind of chill rippled across my skin. The words weren't just cryptic, they were delivered with an odd theatricality, like dialogue from a Victorian melodrama. Ellie closed the fake book with another soft click and turned to leave. As she did, I shifted my weight, trying to get a better angle on the shelf where she'd hidden the note. My hip bumped the corner of the display case. The sound wasn't loud, just a soft thud of fabric against glass, but in the midnight quiet of the library, it might as well have been a gunshot. Ellie froze. For a suspended moment, neither of us moved. Then, with unnerving calmness, she turned toward the display case, eyes scanning the shadows with laser-like precision. "You might as well come out, Virginia," she said, voice barely above a whisper, yet perfectly audible. "The shadows in here aren't as concealing as you think." Jam jars. I straightened, refusing to crawl out like some caught child. Instead, I stepped from behind the case with manufactured confidence, as though I'd planned this confrontation all along. "Working late, Ellie? Interesting filing system you've got there?" I gestured toward the shelf where the hollow book sat among its legitimate neighbors, maintaining a casual tone despite my racing pulse. Didn't realize we were using fake books as inter-office mail. Ellie's smile was perfect, practiced, and utterly disconnected from her eyes, which remained watchful and calculating. With deliberate movements, she removed her white gloves, one finger at a time, before folding them with geometric precision and tucking them into her cardigan pocket. "It's an ARG, alternate reality game," she explained, her voice carrying the practiced lilt of a tour guide. "For the Historical Society remnants and some town history buffs. The curator leaves clues. They follow a trail through Ravenswood's past." The explanation was smooth, plausible even. ARGs were popular, and Ravenswood's obsession with its own history made it the perfect setting. Yet something in her delivery felt rehearsed, as if she'd prepared this very explanation for this very moment. "We've been running it for months," she continued. "Makes history more engaging for the younger crowd." I took a step toward the shelf where the hollow book waited. "Fascinating. Mind if I see the latest clue?" Ellie shifted, not dramatically, but enough to position herself between me and the shelf. The movement was fluid, almost casual, but unmistakably intentional. "It's quite popular, actually," she said, ignoring my request. "Started as a way to maintain interest in local history after the society disbanded. The police know about it. Ask your detective friend." The way she emphasized "your detective" carried an unmistakable edge, a verbal italicization that made my spine straighten. Something here wasn't right. If this was just a harmless game, why the secrecy? Why the hollow books and cryptic whispers? And why did Ellie seem so determined to keep me from examining the clue she'd just planted? Rather than push directly, I decided to test her reaction. "Interesting timing, with Enid's death and all," I said, watching her face carefully. She was quite the history enthusiast. Ellie's expression remained perfectly controlled. Too perfectly. Not a flicker of surprise or grief or discomfort crossed her features. She might have been discussing the weather, rather than a woman found dead less than a week ago. "Poor Enid," she sighed, the sympathy in her voice as authentic as a $3 bill, always searching for validation in dusty corners. She paused, her gaze sharpening as it met mine. "Rather like your journals, Virginia, creating elaborate deaths to process your feelings." I stiffened, unprepared for the sudden shift in focus. My journals were private, or were supposed to be. Since Enid's death, they'd become the subject of whispered speculation, but I hadn't expected Ellie to reference them so directly. Noting my reaction, Ellie's smile widened fractionally. "Oh yes, everyone's talking about your prophetic writing. Quite the gift, or curse, to imagine deaths that come true." The accusation hung in the air between us, disguised as casual conversation, but unmistakable in its implication. I wasn't the only one testing reactions tonight. "I write fiction," I said evenly. "Coincidences happen." "Indeed they do," Ellie nodded, collecting her bag from the desk with unhurried movements. "Just like it's a coincidence that Enid was so interested in the missing foundations of Ravenswood manuscript." We stood facing each other in the half-dark room, surrounded by rare books and unspoken accusations. The desk lamp cast Ellie's shadow long against the wall, stretching and distorting her silhouette until it seemed to loom over us both. "You know," she added conversationally, as if we were chatting over tea rather than circling each other in a darkened library, "the Voss family has always been erased from Ravenswood's narrative. Some say their ghost still walks these stacks, seeking justice." The statement hung in the air, simultaneously a non sequitur, and the most relevant thing she could have said. Voss. The name from the redacted donation record. Ellie Voss, handling both the original donation box and its reshelving. The missing book that supposedly contained proof of whose family truly founded the town. Before I could form a response, Ellie slipped past me toward the door, the scent of lavender and old paper trailing in her wake. "Lock up when you leave, Virginia," she called over her shoulder. Some of these books are irreplaceable. We wouldn't want anything to disappear. And then she was gone, leaving me standing alone in the rare reads room, the hollow book on its shelf, and the unsettling awareness that Ellie wasn't just aware of my journaling habit. She was deliberately playing into it. I remained motionless for several heartbeats, processing the exchange. The conversation had vibrated with subtext, nearly every line carrying double meanings. Ellie hadn't just been defending herself, she'd been sending a message. Or a warning. My phone buzzed, shattering the silence. Cleo's text illuminated the screen. "What's happening? Did you confront her?" I glanced toward the shelf where the hollow book waited. Whatever Ellie had hidden inside that fake tome might provide answers, or simply deepen the mystery. Either way, I had to see it. Moving quickly now, I crossed to the architecture shelf and located the green volume. Up close, I could see that the spine was slightly different from its neighbors. The leather newer, less cracked with age, though artificially distressed to match the surrounding books. Mimicking Ellie's actions, I pressed my finger against a small indentation near the bottom of the spine. The soft click was oddly satisfying as the cover swung open, revealing the hollowed-out interior. Inside lay a single folded sheet of paper, cream-colored, heavy stock, with a subtle watermark visible when I held it to the light. The type of stationery that cost more per sheet than most pens. The same paper as the previous curator notes, with the same typewritten font. I unfolded it carefully, half expecting another cryptic message signed, "The Curator." Instead, I found a simple diagram, what appeared to be a floor plan of the library basement, with one section circled in red ink. Below it, a typewritten message in the same distinctive font. "Where foundations crumble, truth remains buried. Friday midnight. Bring what you found or face the consequences." No signature, no explanation. Just an ominous invitation, or threat, to meet somewhere in the library basement at midnight tomorrow. I refolded the paper and slipped it into my pocket, my mind racing. If this was part of Ellie's supposed ARG, it was an extraordinarily elaborate game. And if it wasn't, my gaze drifted to the window, where shadows had gathered thick against the glass. Outside, the library grounds lay silent under a sliver of moon, the old oak trees casting patterns like reaching fingers across the lawn. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing beneath the largest oak, head tilted up toward the rare reads room window, watching, waiting. I blinked and the figure was gone, if it had ever been there at all. With careful movements, I closed the hollow book and returned it to its shelf, making sure it sat exactly as Ellie had left it. Then I retrieved my phone and texted Cleo. "She's gone. Found something. Meet me at my place in 20. Bring coffee. It's going to be a long night." As I turned to leave, something soft brushed against my ankle. I nearly jumped out of my skin before looking down to see Morticia, her luminous green eyes fixed on mine with unsettling intensity. "Found something interesting, did you?" I whispered. I must have left the carrier door unlatched in my rush to leave home. Somehow, she always managed to find me when things got interesting. She blinked slowly, then turned and padded silently toward the door. I followed, unable to shake the feeling that tomorrow night's meeting wasn't just about a missing book or a historical feud. It was about something darker, something that had already cost Enid her life and might yet claim more. Chapter 8. The dead don't reshelve themselves. I dropped my keys onto the kitchen counter with more force than necessary, the metal clatter startling Morticia from her midnight prowl. She fixed me with a baleful glare before deciding my transgression wasn't worth her energy. 3 graceful leaps brought her to her favorite window perch, where she resumed her vigilant watch over the darkened yard. "I know," I muttered, as if she'd voiced an opinion. "Something's not right." The folded diagram from the hollow book felt heavy in my pocket, a physical reminder that whatever game Ellie was playing had deadly stakes. I placed it on the counter beside my laptop, smoothing the creases with my fingertips. The red circle marking a section of the library basement seemed to glow against the aged paper, a crimson heartbeat pulsing in my peripheral vision. I made coffee even though midnight had come and gone, my mind too tangled with theories and loose threads to consider sleep. By the time Cleo arrived, I'd created a makeshift evidence board on my refrigerator using alphabet magnets left by the previous tenant. "Holy cheesecake," Cleo whispered, eyes wide as she absorbed my kitchen conspiracy wall. "You've gone full detective mode." I handed her a mug of coffee, doctored with the ungodly amount of sugar and cream she preferred. "You're the one with the true crime podcast obsession. I'm just connecting dots." "Very stabby dots." She tapped a magnet, holding up the diagram. "So tomorrow at midnight, huh? That's not ominous or anything." Over the next 2 hours, we dissected everything we knew. The missing book, the mysterious curator notes, the historical society argument, Enid's death, Ellie's strange behavior. By the time Cleo left, I had a plan. Not a great one, but better than walking blindly into a midnight rendezvous in a deserted library basement. I slept fitfully, my dreams filled with book-shaped coffins and endless library stacks where shelves rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking. Morning arrived with cruel brightness. I sat at my kitchen table, clutching my third cup of coffee, while Morticia perched beside my laptop like a silent sentinel. With her glossy black fur and unblinking green eyes, she looked like a paperweight shaped by an artist with a gothic sensibility. I clicked through my emails, deleting junk and flagging library business for later. The interface refreshed, and a new message appeared at the top of the list. No subject line, no sender name, just a string of random characters. A single attachment labeled listenalone.mp3. Morticia's ears pricked forward in sudden alertness. "Right there with you," I muttered, eyeing the suspicious email. Rule 1 of not getting your identity stolen: never open strange attachments. Yet my cursor hovered over the file. This wasn't spam. This was deliberate, personal. I ran a virus scan, watching the progress bar inch forward with maddening slowness. When it finally declared the file clean, I plugged in my headphones and double-clicked. Static hissed through my ears, the sound quality poor, as if recorded on an outdated device. Paper shuffled in the background, accompanied by the squeak of what might have been an old chair. I was about to dismiss it as nothing when a voice emerged through the white noise, thin and quavering, with a distinct breathiness that reminded me of someone overexcited explaining their ancestry chart. Enid Burble. Truth buried under the Voss name. Her voice faded in and out. "They'll destroy it all before anyone finds out." A chill slithered down my spine, like cold fingers tracing my vertebrae. I leaned closer to my laptop, turning the volume to maximum. The scratching sound of a pen moving rapidly across paper filled my ears. Then Enid's voice again, now urgent and hushed. "Someone's coming, I need to—" The recording cut off abruptly. Silence. I hit replay and listened again. And a third time. Each replay confirmed what I already knew. This was Enid, recorded shortly before her death. Not part of an elaborate game. Not a coincidence. Evidence. I checked the timestamp on the email. 6:14 a.m. today. Sent mere hours ago, while most of Ravenswood still slept. With shaking hands, I opened a browser and downloaded a forensics tool from a website Cleo had enthusiastically recommended, months ago, after a binge of digital evidence podcasts. "For research purposes only," she'd insisted with a wink so exaggerated it nearly strained her face. The program extracted hidden metadata from the audio file, revealing information invisible to casual users. Creation date, device information, and, most critically, upload details. "Library Public Wi-Fi Network," I read aloud. Tuesday, 7:42 p.m. Morticia's tail switched once, twice, a metronome marking the significance of my discovery. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the staff schedule. Tuesday evening. Who had been working? There it was, plainly listed on the digital calendar. Tuesday closing shift. Ellie Voss, alone. "Son of a sugar cookie," I whispered. the pieces falling into place with an almost audible click. Morticia gave a low growl, as if she'd reached the same conclusion. No wonder Ellie had been so composed when I confronted her. She hadn't just been playing some strange historical game. She'd been systematically erasing evidence after silencing Enid permanently. I needed to see the security footage. The library opened at 9, but I arrived at 8, citing administrative duties, when the maintenance worker raised an eyebrow at my early appearance. I made a beeline for the security system, tucked away in a closet-sized room off the main office. Our setup was basic: 4 cameras covering the entrance, main reading room, children's section, and back door. Nothing for the rare reads room. The budget hadn't stretched that far. Still, the cameras ran continuously, storing footage on the external hard drive for 2 weeks before overwriting. I pulled up Tuesday's date and found nothing. "That's not possible," I muttered, clicking through the folders again. Monday was there, Wednesday too, but Tuesday's folder contained no files. I checked the system log and found my answer. Unexpected maintenance reset at midnight Tuesday. All footage from that day erased. How convenient. I closed the security program, struggling to maintain my composure. My heart slammed against my ribs like it was trying to escape, a feeling I recognized with unfortunate familiarity. The body's reaction to stumbling across incriminating evidence. Again. By the time the library opened, I'd retreated to my office, trying to look like a normal librarian with normal concerns about overdue books and printer cartridges, rather than someone who'd just discovered a potential murderer on staff. Through my office window, I watched Ellie arrive precisely on time, her movements efficient and contained. Her ever-present white gloves gleamed under the fluorescent lights as she logged into her workstation. From this distance, those gloves no longer seemed like the quirky affectation of a preservationist. They looked like what they might well be, a way to avoid leaving fingerprints. I found Cleo in the back room, surrounded by boxes of new mystery novels. She was humming softly while applying color-coded stickers to the spines. Her organizational system that somehow made perfect sense to her and baffled everyone else. "Staff break room, now," I whispered, not waiting for a response before heading there myself. Cleo followed moments later, curiosity bright in her eyes. "What's happening? Did you con?" I closed the door firmly and turned the lock, cutting off her question. Without preamble, I pulled out my phone, plugged in earbuds, and handed them to her. "Listen." Cleo's expression transformed as the recording played, her usual sunshine dimming to focused concentration. Her eyes widened at Enid's voice, then narrowed thoughtfully at the abrupt ending. When she removed the earbuds, her face had the intent look she reserved for true crime theories and murder board construction. "That's definitely Enid." She handed back my phone. "And you said the upload time matches Ellie's solo shift?" "Yes, and the security footage just happened to be wiped that night." Cleo exhaled slowly, her candy-pink nails tapping against her forearm. "When was the last time our system had an unexpected maintenance reset?" "Never." I began pacing the small break room, 5 steps one way, turn, 5 steps back. I hired Ellie because of her technical skills and preservation knowledge. She helped install the new security system. The realization made me stop mid-pace. She knows every vulnerability in our archives. "You couldn't have known," Cleo said, correctly reading my expression. "I should have connected the names. Voss. It was right there on her application." I shook my head. Ellie must have found Enid at the Historical Society. Maybe Enid discovered something about the Voss family that Ellie wanted to keep hidden. Or maybe Ellie found the missing book first, and Enid confronted her. Cleo pulled a floral notebook from her cardigan pocket. Her investigation journal, which she'd started keeping after our first accidental murder case. She flipped through pages of meticulous notes, each murder color-coded and indexed with washi tape tabs. "Everything fits," she said. The gloves to hide fingerprints, her access to all the historical materials, the Voss family connection. She looked up at me with uncharacteristic seriousness. "What do we do?" "Go to Detective Stone?" I shook my head, ignoring the small voice in my brain that always whispered, "Call Alex," whenever things got dangerous. Not yet. We need more than circumstantial evidence and a creepy audio file sent anonymously. I absently rubbed my wrist, where a faint scar remained from our last murder investigation. Stone already thinks I'm involved because of my journal entries. Through the break room window, I could see Ellie at the front desk, her white-gloved hands moving with precise efficiency as she cataloged a stack of books. From this distance, she looked perfectly ordinary, just a quiet librarian doing her job. The thought chilled me more than any ghost story. "We need proof," I continued. "Something that ties her directly to Enid's death, or the missing book." "The basement meeting tomorrow night?" Cleo suggested, hope brightening her voice. "Too risky going in blind. If Ellie killed Enid, I'm not confronting her alone in a deserted basement." I paused, an idea forming. "But maybe we can set a trap of our own." That evening, I sat at my writing desk, the smooth oak surface illuminated by a single lamp. Morticia watched from atop a nearby bookshelf, her tail occasionally twitching as if keeping time with my thoughts. I opened my journal, the same leather-bound volume I'd been writing in when I'd imagined a death scene eerily similar to Enid's actual demise. The pages felt heavy with consequence now, as if my fictional murders had gained tangible weight. "Two can play this game," I murmured, uncapping my fountain pen. I began to write with deliberate strokes, the ink flowing dark and smooth across the cream-colored page. The cleverest killers are those who disappear into their own carefully constructed stories, until the moment they become trapped in the narrative they created. They leave breadcrumbs, thinking they control who follows the trail. But a skilled reader sees beyond the words on the page to the truth hidden between the lines. Perhaps the most dangerous trap is a false confession, evidence planted where it will be found, twisted to implicate someone else entirely. The guilty hand writes with confidence, unaware that every stroke reveals more than intended. In the library basement, where shadows hold old secrets, a killer might return to retrieve what was hastily hidden, or to stage a final scene that places blame elsewhere. I left the last line unfinished, the pen hovering above the paper for a dramatic moment before I set it down. Morticia gave a soft sound, not quite a meow, more a question mark made audible. "Exactly," I told her. "Let's see if Ellie takes the bait." The next morning, I arrived at work early again and placed my journal conspicuously on my desk, angled just so, as if I'd been interrupted while writing. The page remained open to my latest entry, a deliberate invitation for prying eyes. Throughout the day, I maintained a fiction of distracted busyness, stepping away from my office frequently for meetings and collection evaluations. Each time I returned, I checked the position of my journal, looking for the telltale signs that someone had examined it in my absence. By mid-afternoon, I noticed a subtle shift. The ribbon bookmark had moved slightly, and the page corner showed the faintest crease, as if someone had touched it and then tried to smooth it back into place. Ellie had taken the bait. Now I just needed her to act on it. As closing time approached, I texted Detective Stone. "Need to show you something important. Library basement, tonight, 11:45. Not giving him details, not yet, but making sure someone official would be nearby when Ellie arrived for our midnight rendezvous. After all, what better way to catch a killer than to borrow a scene from their own book? I closed the journal, satisfied with my trap, and glanced at Morticia, who watched me from atop my dresser with that particular look of feline judgment she'd perfected over the years. "Don't give me that look," I murmured. "This is how you catch someone who thinks they're smarter than everyone else." Morticia's tail flicked once, her opinion on my plan clearly mixed at best. I eyed her carrier in the corner. The library was technically a no-pets zone, but Morticia had been an unofficial resident since I'd become head librarian. The staff had long ago accepted her occasional presence during after-hours work, and frankly, I could use the extra set of eyes tonight. Something told me this stakeout might require all the help we could get. Chapter 9. The Curator Cracks. I'd spent most of my adult life trying to be invisible, A librarian in the shadows, cataloging other people's stories rather than living my own. But, as I angled my journal on my desk at precisely 7:42 a.m., lamp positioned to spotlight the open page like some melodramatic stage prop, I acknowledged the irony. I was setting a trap with myself as bait. The journal entry about a killer trapped in their own narrative lay exposed, the ink barely dry. I'd even smudged the final line for dramatic effect, making it appear as though I'd been interrupted mid-thought. Subtle? About as subtle as Cleo's true crime podcast collection. But effective? We'd see. I circled my desk one last time, adjusting the angle by a few critical degrees. Morticia would be disappointed in me, using books as props rather than treating them with proper reverence. But desperate times and murdered genealogists called for desperate measures. When I reached the circulation desk, Cleo was already there, somehow managing to look both professional in her cardigan and like she was about to burst from excitement. She gave me a subtle thumbs up that was about as inconspicuous as a fireworks display. "Could you be any more obvious?" I muttered, shuffling papers to look busy as our first patrons trickled in. "Sorry," she whispered, her grin undiminished. "But this is legitimately the most thrilling thing we've ever done. We're literally setting a trap for a murderer. In a library." "Yes, how novel. A crime in a library. Whatever will they think of next?" I rolled my eyes, but couldn't entirely suppress my own nervous energy. "Just act normal. And by normal, I mean your version of it, not whatever this is." "Got it. Normal Cleo, reporting for duty." She saluted with her pen. "Sweet macaroons, we're doomed." Throughout the morning, I maintained my usual routine, helping elderly patrons navigate the digital catalog, deflecting Mrs. Habersham's weekly complaint about the racy romance covers, and gently removing Mr. Peterson's half-eaten sandwich from between the returns. But part of me remained hyper-focused on my office door, which I'd deliberately left ajar. During the mid-morning lull, I caught sight of Ellie hovering near my office, her white-gloved hands fidgeting with catalog cards in a way that might appear industrious to anyone else, but to me screamed calculating opportunist. I'd never paid much attention to our newest hire before. She'd been so quiet, so efficient, so forgettable. The perfect camouflage. Our eyes met across the reference section. She smiled pleasantly, nodding as if we were simply colleagues acknowledging each other. But her eyes, cold, assessing, told a different story. The disconnect between her curved lips and those calculating eyes sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the library's aggressive air conditioning. Later, as I shelved a cart of returns in the history section, Cleo appeared at the end of the stack, ostensibly rearranging local interest books. "Your trap is set," she whispered as we passed each other. "Now we wait." I nodded slightly, sliding maritime disasters of New England into its rightful place. "She's been circling my office all morning, like a shark that moisturizes." "I've been watching her, too. She checked your journal twice when you were helping that college kid with his thesis research." "Good." I kept my voice low. "Now we just need to see if she takes the bait about the basement meeting tonight." "What if she doesn't?" Cleo asked, a rare moment of doubt crossing her face. "She will." I pulled another book from my cart. People like Ellie can't resist proving they're the smartest person in the room. The rest of the day crawled by with excruciating slowness. While outwardly maintaining my usual sardonic efficiency, inwardly I felt like one of those bombs from old cartoons with the fizzing fuse, just waiting for the explosion. I texted Detective Stone again before leaving work, confirming our 11:45 meeting at the library. He responded with a typically terse, "We'll be there, don't do anything stupid." I refrained from replying that stupidity was entirely relative when dealing with historical manuscript theft and murder. At home, I fed Morticia, ate a sad excuse for dinner. Toast doesn't become a meal just because you add an egg, and tried to distract myself with a new Gothic mystery. But the fictional deaths couldn't compete with the very real ones still haunting me. Poor Enid, eccentric and exasperating, yes, but passionate about historical truth. She didn't deserve to die beneath a pile of musty records. I dozed off sometime after 9, still dressed, the book splayed across my chest. When my phone blared at 10:38 p.m., I was already half-conscious, as if some part of me had been expecting the intrusion. The security app flashed its red warning, Rare Reads Room, Breach. Before I could even swipe to silence it, Cleo's call came through. "It's happening!" she practically shouted, her voice vibrating with adrenaline. "The Rare Reads Room alarm just triggered. I'm 5 minutes out. Meet you there." "I'm on my way." I was already grabbing my keys and library badge. "Don't go in alone, Cleo. Wait for me." "But what if she's destroying evidence?" "And what if she's willing to kill again? Promise me." "Fine," she huffed. "But hurry!" I hung up, pulled on my boots, and gave Morticia an apologetic scratch. "Don't wait up." The library loomed dark against the night sky. Its Victorian architecture transformed into something more Gothic by moonlight and circumstance. I parked around back, away from the main entrance, and checked my phone. Stone had responded to my update with, "On my way. 15 minutes. Do not engage." Too late for that. The security panel inside the service entrance confirmed what we already knew. Only the Rare Reads Room had been breached. No other disturbances registered throughout the building. I silenced the soft warning beep with my code, plunging the foyer back into darkness and silence. With my phone ready to speed dial Stone at the first sign of real danger, I moved through the darkened main floor. The library after hours had always felt like a different world, a place where stories breathed more freely without readers to disturb them. Tonight, it felt like those stories were holding their breath, waiting. The building's familiar creaks and settling sounds provided an unsettling soundtrack as I navigated by memory and the dim glow of emergency exit signs. Past the reference desk, through the local history section, up to the mezzanine level where the specialized collections lived behind locked doors. Outside the Rare Reads Room, I paused at an unmistakable sound, the mechanical whir of a shredder, punctuated by tearing paper and muttered curses. My heart hammered against my ribs as I eased the door open, wincing at the faint squeak of hinges. Ellie stood with her back to me, hunched over a small portable shredder she must have brought with her. Her white gloves, once pristine, were now smudged with archival dust and ink. On the reading table lay a leather-bound volume, its cover worn but unmistakable from the descriptions we'd found. Foundations of Ravenswood. Its binding was broken, pages scattered across the surface like fallen leaves. She was systematically feeding what looked like specific pages into the shredder's hungry maw. "Stop!" I shouted, lunging toward her and the machine. Ellie whirled around, clutching something to her chest, an ornate bookplate, the matching piece to the fragment found in Enid's cold hand. Her composure, always so perfect, cracked visibly as she backed against the shelves. "You don't understand what this would do to us," she hissed, her voice stripped of its usual measured calm. "I understand that you killed Enid over a book," I countered, keeping my eye on both her hands and the manuscript pages she'd been destroying. "It's not just a book." Her voice shook. "It's my family's entire legacy." The door burst open behind me, and Cleo appeared, breathless and wide-eyed. Her dramatic entrance might have been comical under different circumstances, but now it served a critical purpose, blocking the only exit. Ellie's gaze darted between us, then to the windows, sealed shut decades ago to protect the rare materials, and finally to the fire alarm on the wall, which would certainly bring people, but not the kind that would help her escape. I watched the calculations run behind her eyes before her shoulders slumped in what appeared to be defeat. "I thought you of all people would understand, Virginia," she said, her voice eerily calm despite her trembling hands. "You also know what it's like when the past won't let you go." "I write fictional deaths in a journal," I countered. "I don't actually kill people. Everyone has their coping mechanisms." The slight curl of her lip made my skin crawl. Mine just happened to be more Proactive. While keeping my eyes on Ellie, I began carefully gathering the scattered manuscript pages from the table. Many were dog-eared or marked with small pencil notations. Enid's work, most likely. The book itself was beautiful, despite its damaged state, bound in tooled leather, with gilt lettering that caught what little light filtered into the room. "Go ahead, read it," Ellie said, her tone shifting to something almost scholarly, detached. Page 43 has the relevant passage. The book proves the Voss family plagiarized their claim to founding status. My ancestor stole his research from a Catterwick servant and passed it off as original work. She gestured at the pages with disgust. If this became public, my family's name would be destroyed. Again. "So you killed Enid for a family reputation?" I asked, genuine horror creeping into my voice. Even in my most morbid imaginings, I'd never understood how people could take a life over something so abstract. Ellie's face contorted, a flash of genuine distress breaking through her controlled exterior. "I didn't mean to!" The words erupted from her. "She found me at the Historical Society that night. I was searching through the archives, and suddenly she was there, watching me with those beady eyes behind those ridiculous glasses. We argued. She was going to expose everything." Ellie's breath hitched. "She fell during the struggle, and those heavy archive boxes. When I saw what had happened, I panicked." Her voice faltered, then hardened. "But then I remembered your journal entry, the one about drowning in footnotes. It was like a sign. I made the scene look exactly like you'd written it." I stared at her, the full extent of her manipulation dawning on me. "The curator notes, the ARG story, all of it was to create confusion while you searched for the book." Ellie nodded, a flicker of pride crossing her features. "I almost had you believing your journal was somehow causing deaths. Quite effective, wasn't it?" "You're completely butterscotch crackers," I said, the dessert expletive slipping out before I could stop it. "That's rather unprofessional language for a head librarian," she replied with maddening condescension. The distant wail of sirens cut through the tension. Cleo held up her phone, her expression a mixture of triumph and apprehension. "I called Stone when I arrived. He's 2 minutes out." Ellie's expression shifted from defeat to quiet rage. With deliberate slowness, she removed her white gloves 1 finger at a time, revealing ink-stained hands beneath. Hands that had arranged archive boxes over a dying woman. Hands that had typed notes to manipulate me. Hands that had tried to erase history itself. "My family has been erased from Ravenswood's story once before," she said, her voice soft but vibrant with conviction. "It won't happen again. This isn't over." The threat hung in the air between us as heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs, followed by Detective Stone's commanding voice calling my name. "You set a trap for a murder suspect without backup," Stone said as he supervised the evidence collection. It wasn't a question, just a statement of absolute certainty and absolute disapproval. "Technically, we had backup," I countered, gesturing between myself and Cleo. "There were 2 of us." "Oh, jam jars," Cleo muttered. "He means police backup, V." Stone pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his "grant me patience before I arrest this librarian" signal. "One day, Varnell, we'll meet under circumstances that don't involve a body or a crime scene." I watched as Ellie was led away by a uniformed officer, her shoulders straight despite the handcuffs, her chin lifted in defiance. Even now, heading toward a murder charge, she maintained the bearing of someone who believed absolutely in her own rightness. It was chilling. "Don't count on it, Detective," I said softly. "This town seems determined to keep us professionally entangled." With gloved hands, proper evidence-handling gloves, not Ellie's pristine archival ones, I carefully preserved what remained of the manuscript, gathering the damaged pages in the correct order. Even now, with the killer caught and the mystery solved, I found no satisfaction in the victory, only the hollow recognition that some stories have no heroes, only people trapped by their own histories. And sometimes, the most dangerous books aren't the ones that contain dark magic or forbidden knowledge, but the ones that simply tell the truth about who we really are. Chapter 10. Filed under Murder. I sat alone in the library's cramped security room, my finger hovering over the rewind button as I watched the footage for what felt like the 100th time. The screen flickered with its grainy, blue-tinted view of Ellie Voss entering the rare reads room 3 nights earlier. Something was different this time. Now that I knew what I was looking for, I could see the subtle determination in her posture, the practiced way she scanned her surroundings while appearing to simply go about her duties. She'd perfected the art of invisibility, the quiet library assistant no one would suspect of murder. Pause, I muttered to myself, freezing the frame where Ellie glanced directly at the camera. There was no guilt in her eyes, no hesitation, just calm, clinical purpose. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman protecting what she believed was rightfully hers. I resumed the footage, watching as she methodically placed her curator notes around the room. Under the antique desk calendar, inside the hollow book on the third shelf, tucked between the pages of the acquisition ledger, the breadcrumb trail she'd laid to confuse me, to make me doubt myself. We both use words as weapons, I murmured to the empty room, recognizing the uncomfortable parallel between my morbid journal entries and Ellie's calculated deceptions. We'd both written deaths, in our own way. Mine were fictional scenarios penned in leather-bound journals. Hers were real and written in human suffering. The difference between us suddenly seemed alarmingly thin. I rewound again, focusing on her gloved hands as they arranged everything just so. Those pristine white gloves, the ones she'd dramatically removed after being caught, revealing ink-stained fingers beneath. Even that had been theatrical, a performance designed to unnerve. "Sweet cinnamon rolls," I whispered. "She's good." "Talking to yourself again, Varnell." I jumped so hard, I nearly knocked over my cold tea. Detective Stone stood in the doorway, a cardboard cup of coffee in each hand, and that infuriatingly neutral expression on his face. How long he'd been standing there was anyone's guess. "Normal people knock," I said, straightening in the uncomfortable office chair. "Normal people don't spend their day off reviewing crime scene footage." He entered without invitation, setting one of the coffee cups beside my keyboard. A peace offering of sorts. "The manuscript is with the historical preservation team," he said, leaning against the doorframe in that casual way that somehow made the tiny room feel even smaller. "Ellie Voss is refusing to speak except through her lawyer." I picked up the coffee and took a tentative sip. It was surprisingly decent, and black, no cream or sugar. He remembered how I took it. "She killed Enid to protect a family reputation that was already tarnished," I said, shaking my head, "and used my journal habits to create misdirection." I gestured toward the screen where Ellie's frozen image still stared back at us. "She might have gotten away with it if she hadn't gotten creative." Stone's expression remained carefully neutral as he took a sip from his own cup. "Your imagination is specific, Varnell. Makes people uncomfortable." I looked up, meeting his steady gaze. "Including you?" He held my eyes for a beat too long before answering. "I'm still deciding." Then he pushed off from the doorframe, leaving me with the surveillance footage and cooling coffee, the ghost of something unresolved hanging in the air between us. "Lock up when you're done," he added over his shoulder, "and maybe consider a hobby that doesn't involve death scenarios. Birdwatching, perhaps." "Birds are just dinosaurs with anxiety," I called after him. "I'll stick with murder." I heard what might have been a chuckle from the hallway, but I couldn't be sure. Later that afternoon, I supervised the final cleanup of the rare reads room. The restoration team had come and gone, carefully packing away the damaged foundations of Ravenswood manuscript in acid-free folders and climate-controlled containers. What remained of Ellie's desperate attempt to destroy it would be professionally restored, ironically preserving the very history she'd tried to erase. I found myself lingering at the spot where she'd stood, shredding pages that fluttered like wounded moths. The wood flooring still bore scuff marks from the struggle, small imperfections only visible if you knew where to look. "How many other buried secrets are you hiding?" I asked the empty room, running my fingers along the edge of a century-old bookshelf. Ravenswood was built on layers of half-truths and outright lies. Families like the Vosses and Catterwicks squabbling over legacies, while the truth moldered between them. "Talking to the ghosts again?" Cleo appeared in the doorway, her bright yellow cardigan a shock of color against the room's muted tones. "I brought sanitizing wipes. The restoration team left fingerprint dust everywhere." I accepted the canister with a nod of thanks. "Just communing with our town's proud tradition of scandal and suppression." "Ooh, sounds festive," Cleo said, attacking a nearby shelf with a lemon-scented wipe. She'd been unusually subdued since the arrest, at least subdued by Cleo standards, which still involved more enthusiasm than most people mustered on their wedding day. "You okay?" I asked, immediately regretting the question. Heart-to-hearts weren't exactly my specialty. Cleo paused mid-wipe. "I liked Ellie, you know. She was quiet, but she always remembered everyone's birthdays and brought those little cinnamon cookies to staff meetings." She sighed dramatically. "This is why I never trust the quiet ones." "Thanks," I said dryly. "Except you," she added hastily. "You're quiet in a completely different, intimidating, obviously not a murderer way." "That's comforting? You know what I mean." Cleo attacked a particularly stubborn spot of fingerprint dust. "You put your murder thoughts in journals. Ellie put hers into action. Major difference." I couldn't argue with that logic, even if it made me sound like I was one bad day away from going full Agatha Christie villain. We finished cleaning in companionable silence, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the room's single window. As I locked the door behind us, I felt a strange finality. The case was closed, the killer caught, the book saved. Back at my apartment that evening, Morticia stretched languidly across my desk as I opened my journal to a fresh page. The cat's glossy black fur seemed to absorb what little light came from my desk lamp, making her look like a liquid shadow with judgmental green eyes. Her paw brushed against my hand as I hesitated over the blank page, either offering silent encouragement or trying to nudge the pen away before I wrote something that might manifest in reality. With Morticia, it was always hard to tell. "Don't worry," I told her, scratching behind her ears. "I'm closing the book on this particular murder, not opening the door for another." She blinked slowly, clearly unconvinced. My pen moved deliberately across the page. "Some truths rot in silence. Others are exhumed, catalogued, and, eventually, shelved again where they belong." I paused, tapping the pen against my lower lip before adding with a sardonic flourish. "Next time, I'll write something cheerful, maybe about a tax audit." Morticia made a noise suspiciously like a snort and rolled onto her back, exposing her belly in what I knew from experience was absolutely a trap, not an invitation. "Everyone's a critic," I muttered, closing the journal and sliding it into its drawer. As I got ready for bed, I found myself replaying Stone's words in my mind. "Your imagination is specific, Varnell. Makes people uncomfortable." He wasn't wrong. I'd spent my life cataloging different ways people could die, finding a strange comfort in organizing the chaos of mortality into neat fictional scenarios. Those journals had been my private refuge, until Ellie Voss decided to use them as a template for her crime scene. The thought made me shiver despite the warmth of my apartment. Morticia appeared in the bedroom doorway, stretching before hopping onto the bed and curling into a perfect circle on my pillow. "Did I invite you?" I asked. She didn't bother responding, except to close her eyes with emphatic finality. "Fine," I sighed, "but stay on your side this time." I switched off the lamp and settled beside my feline roommate, listening to the soft rhythm of her purrs as sleep gradually claimed me. The next morning, I reopened the Rare Reads room with a small ceremony that the mayor's office had insisted upon. A dozen folding chairs had been arranged in the small space, most of them occupied by council members and local reporters from the Ravenswood Gazette. Mayor Vexley himself stood at the makeshift podium, droning on about historical integrity and preserving our community's distinguished legacy. I tugged at the collar of my least wrinkled black dress, wishing I'd had time for a second cup of coffee before this political theater began. The entire event was carefully choreographed to emphasize what the town was gaining, a restored historical manuscript, rather than what it had lost. No one mentioned Enid Burble or Ellie Voss by name. And we are fortunate to have such dedicated professionals as our head librarian, Ms. Virginia Varnell, who went above and beyond to ensure this precious artifact was recovered, Mayor Vexley was saying, gesturing toward me with a perfectly rehearsed smile. I nodded stiffly in acknowledgement, painfully aware of the cameras capturing my discomfort. "Would you like to say a few words, Ms. Varnell?" the mayor asked, his eyes telegraphing that the correct answer was a brief, bland statement of gratitude, followed by a hasty retreat from the microphone. "Just that the library is committed to preserving all of Ravenswood's history," I said, emphasizing the word all slightly more than necessary. "Even the parts some might prefer to forget." A flash of calculation crossed Mayor Vexley's face, barely disguised as civic pride. He reclaimed the microphone with practiced smoothness. "Well said! And now, to mark this occasion, we have refreshments in the main reading room, courtesy of Sweet Nothing's Bakery." The small crowd began to disperse, clearly more interested in free pastries than historical preservation. I busied myself rearranging chairs, avoiding the mayor's eye, even as I felt him watching me from across the room. Cleo sidled up beside me, her usual cheerful energy seemingly amplified as she grabbed my arm. "There's a box," she whispered urgently. "There are many boxes in a library," I replied, stacking a folding chair against the wall. "You'll need to be more specific." "A donation box," she clarified, eyes wide with excitement. "It arrived this morning from an anonymous donor. I peeked. There's some really interesting stuff in there." Define interesting. "Old ledgers, photographs, newspaper clippings, exactly the kind of mysterious historical stuff that leads to murders in this town," she said with disturbing enthusiasm. "You've been listening to too many true crime podcasts again." "Maybe," she conceded, "but don't you want to see it? It's in your office." I sighed, knowing resistance was futile. When Cleo got that gleam in her eye, it was easier to just go along with her than to argue. "Fine, but if there's another cryptic note inside, I'm calling in sick for a month." The cardboard box sat innocently on my desk, labeled "New Donations, Unprocessed," in Cleo's looping handwriting. It was dusty and slightly water-damaged at one corner, suggesting it had been stored somewhere less than ideal before making its way to us. I began sorting through its contents: leather-bound ledgers from the 1920s, faded photographs of stone-faced families standing in front of buildings that no longer existed, and newspaper clippings yellowed with age. My hands moved with practiced efficiency, mentally cataloging each item. "See? Interesting," Cleo said, hovering over my shoulder. "Check the bottom." I continued my methodical sorting, cataloging each item with the precision that had become second nature after years as a librarian. Family photographs, business ledgers, newspaper clippings, each a small piece of Ravenswood's complex history. "See? Interesting," Cleo said, hovering over my shoulder. "Perfect for the local history collection." "They'll need proper archiving," I agreed, already mentally planning the preservation work. Some of these photographs could make a nice display for the town's anniversary next month. Cleo helped me arrange the materials back in the box. So, another mystery solved, another historical treasure preserved. We're getting pretty good at this. "Don't get used to it," I warned, though I couldn't quite suppress a small smile. "I'd prefer a few quiet months of normal library business before our next adventure." "In Ravenswood?" Cleo laughed. "Good luck with that." As we walked together toward the main desk, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The case was closed, a killer caught, and a historical record preserved rather than destroyed. For a librarian with a penchant for imagining deaths, it was as close to a happy ending as I could reasonably expect. And for now, that was enough. Thank you for listening. Please visit me at winvalentine.com to stay up to date. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and a review.